Hello. Hi, welcome to the coaching game. I'm Laurie Lawson, and tonight my guest is Nicholas Harvey. Nicholas, welcome.
Thank you, Laurie. So glad to be with you.
I'm thrilled that you're here. Let me tell you a little bit about Nicholas, and he's going to tell you a whole bunch. Nicholas is a coach, he's a consultant and a strategic advisor, and he's a catalyst for personal and organizational excellence to achieve societal impact. Well, I'm impressed already. And he's going to tell us a little bit more about that. So, Nicholas, what you been up to? Because I know you're down there in Georgia, and there's a lot of
Yes,
stuff going on down there. What's happening?
yes.
What's
Georgia has become the center of the political universe
Isn't that amazing?
in the United States of America. Who would have thought, right? And the idea that we're in the season and there are two Senate seats, right? And the opportunity perhaps, to change, shift power and the like. It's crazy. I just finished working with a campaign to complete the term for Congressman John Lewis, our candidate Robert Franklin, who was the former president of Morehouse College here in Atlanta. And so just a lot going on right now. Just think that it's just so important, especially with the upcoming votes that are coming, trying to move to get people some aid, some assistance, health, the midst of rolling out vaccines and the like. We are at the center of the universe, and it is just a whirlwind as people are converging upon Georgia from really around the country.
Well, tell me, first of all, tell me what a catalyst for personal and organizational excellence to achieve societal impact. Tell me what that does, and then tell me how it has changed in 2020, because you've got to have some ramifications. You'd be the only person in the United States without ramifications. So what do you do, and how has it changed?
Sure, sure. I really believe, that we are able and capable to bring about and to embody the type of change that we seek. And so the term I use is catalyst, sort of a jump start for folks as they think about their lives within their organizations, within their families, those places where we live, and those places and spaces that are most important for us. And I really think that in this season, that becomes the question. It's like, what's really, really important? And the season, this turbulent season that we've been in, for the past several months has really made us sort of stop and say, what kind of world do we want to live in? And so to be able to bring about that type of transformation, I coach, individuals, I work with organizations. So that's public service organizations, government agencies, and nonprofits. Those that are more mission-minded and socially oriented to bring about change in a more just society. And so that's what I do, and I find great fun doing that. Started off years ago as a pastor, and touching the lives of people. And when people talk about their lives and what impact they want to have and their legacy, right? What really makes life matter. And so I get to have great fun and support people while they do that.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I know on a personal level, what really makes life matter was so different in 2019. And I'm sure there have been so many changes. I call it a blessing of the pandemic because it's really made us sort of get our priorities straight and,
Mm-hmm.
or at least prioritize, it's like, oh, maybe that apartment with an extra room, not that important right now. So what have you seen, and as you said, you're in the epicenter, what have you seen change in 2020?
Mm. The language that I use the plural pandemics, as opposed to just sort of the pandemic, because I think that the COVID pandemic served to accelerate and expose a lot of what people are seeing now. And so I began originally, just recently did a piece as I documented what was going on in the nonprofit sector, talking about the path forward. It was called Pandemics, Politics, and Policy. And so I said that we were negotiating at first at least three pandemics. So first was epidemiology, second was economy, and then third was equity. And so in this particular space, we see the movements because you have these sort of intersecting trajectories going on. So the pandemic starts, then we have the coronavirus. And so then we see the challenges with the lockdowns and the economy. And then we see the highly publicized murder of George Floyd. And so what the pandemic did for us is we made a stop and we started paying attention. Because a lot of the inequities that we see from a social perspective, from an economic perspective, and then with the coronavirus in terms of healthcare, this was already going on. And so there's this different type of awareness that we now have. But then there's also another level of dissatisfaction, right? Where we're no longer just taking it for granted and saying, we just can't let this go on. And again, asking about what type of society do I want to live in? What type of world do I want to live in? For those who might have children and grandchildren, is this the type of world we want to leave for them? And so that's what I really believe has changed, is we have a different type of awareness now. And then also a different type of urgency about what's going on.
That is so profound. First of all, I love your alliteration. 3 P's, 3 E's, you got it going on. but it makes it easy to remember. I think what has happened a lot of times is we have to pay attention simply because we don't have so many distractions. I'm in the middle of New York City in Times Square, and it just stopped. And it's like, oh my God, I can't run out to a play. I can't do. It's just like, well, you better just sit around and get this together. And it took me a long time, but I think it has brought to the forefront the systemic problems that we've always had. One thing that I love that it brought to the forefront was that our essential workers are not the people making all the money. It's the people who are helping us get through the day, and I sure hope that continues. What do you see as the role of everyday American person? What can they do? And then we can break it down in groups if you want to, however you want to do it. What do you think the role has become as opposed to what it was? I mean, besides survival, because we all know if we all get through this, hallelujah, but besides that, what do you think the role is?
Yeah, I think that there is power in the individual. That was something that perhaps was lost as we've lost confidence in our institutions. The idea that people are, as you say, we're just really trying to survive. But now people have claimed a newly found sense of agency, and that indeed, one person can make a difference. Even in the idea that, before May, this unknown gentleman by the name of George Floyd was going about his business, all right? And the idea of what his death sparked, in the midst of this country, and created this type of tipping point. The same thing in terms of our election, right? The idea that, my vote actually does matter. When we see, the election, really being, sort of, we describe it as close, but you understand we actually had, many different elections going on in different states and counties, right? And so those margins were really narrow when you start looking at it at a granular level. And the idea that, yes, my vote actually does matter, and people are taking that seriously. And so the role of the individual would be this newly found agency, and I hope we really don't lose that.
I agree. Were you surprised at the reaction to George Floyd? Because, we were all just like, when we saw it, it was horrendous, but it's like going to be like a mass school shooting, we'll give them prayers and thoughts and move along. Were you surprised? I was elated. I'm so sorry it happened, of course, but I was elated that people took up the cause all of a sudden. Were you surprised, or did you see it coming?
This is a both and. So this is a yes and, because we have seen these tragedies happen again and again, and you start asking the question, well, when is enough going to be enough, right? But I did not expect it to happen in May. Of course, here in Georgia, at the same time, we were dealing with the murder of Ahmaud Arbery.
Yes.
And so we see this swelling of a tide, so to speak, going on. But what the pandemic from the coronavirus and the lockdowns, what it afforded us was an opportunity to give attention to it.
Yeah. Oh, okay. All right.
You know, and I think that's really important to understand our attention and how fleeting that is. And so again, when I start and I use that language of the intersecting trajectories again, that they come together and created this critical inflection point. And so it held our attention, and seeing it on the news and hearing it reported. And now we're having a different set of conversations. And so now the inequities are undeniable because it's really been put in front of us and not just limited in certain communities, right? Where they're very much aware of it. From a historical perspective, the African American community, with regard to the killing of African Americans, you know, lynching used to be public. Actually, used to be public affairs, and the type of you know, the idea of, you know, this has been publicized. You know, video cameras, you know, upon our police officers are like, they're now recording it, and now the information is now readily available, and so it's no longer localized. It's now national and internationally salient.
Interesting, because I think when I met you, I told you that I had just finished the book Cast.
Oh, yes.
Yes, and which, you know, the seasons of our discontent and how they came about. And I went around and I wanted to tell everybody, and every Black person that I told, to go, uh-huh. It was like, okay, you go ahead, little white girl, and get all upset. We've been living this for years, you know.
4 years.
Oh my God.
Yes.
But hallelujah, because it did make us aware. And you're right, Aubrey, I had a feeling he was going to slip by the wayside, and then the George Floyd movement came along, and he was embraced. And that was so, I mean, even my cause was Freddie Gray. That broke my heart, and that was Baltimore, and so many years ago. He came back. It was just like, it's happening, and it's so hard to believe, and you feel like it's fragile, but I think it's really gaining strength all the time. What is our role politically? What are you doing down there politically to keep this movement going, to get awareness going? What are you doing down there? I know you're active.
Oh, yes. So so in the wake of it, I was able to go ahead and write 2 pieces actually. One was just a piece that I really wrote from the heart, you know, just talking about the inequities with regard to anti-Black racism in the country, looking briefly, you know, historically what that was about. Because again, we're having this different level of awareness. You know, you mentioned your own reading and the like. And so I think that's really important. But the opportunities to have conversations in a different way. You know, we tend to live in silos in our world. We talk to the same type of people. We go to the same places all the time. And, you know, one of the things that I enjoyed about, you know, how you and I came together was, you know, working through the International Coach Federation, that we can meet different people, you know, and I really just enjoy that so much, because we ought to have the ability to question. And so one, you have a different type of awareness. 2, you get to start practicing having those difficult conversations. And I especially think that as a coach, we now can help people, and there are some opportunities here to help folks to have those difficult conversations. One, and in doing so, we get to build even some resilience, right? Because folks are having some cognitive dissonance right now, and they're like, I can't believe this. One, on the other hand, there are people like, I can't believe I didn't know this. It's like
Me.
and then
Exactly.
you know, you know, the idea of, you know, what Francis Winters talks about in terms of Black fatigue, and how it's like, yes, we've been experiencing this for a long time. But then on the political front is raising the questions of our political leaders. You know, in many ways, people, you know, your attitude about equity, about inclusion, you know, and what that means is becoming a litmus test, you know, for many of our leaders, right? Even, you know, across the aisle, right? because it's interesting that when people talk about the election and how our country is really so divided, I tend to be a little more hopeful because I really see the election as a move towards the center. And because I don't think by any measure of the imagination, anyone could say that, President-elect Biden is, a radical socialist Democrat. It's like, no, right? That he is a centrist. People voted for the center in that regard. Also, as I look at the election, you can find that there are people in the country who voted Republican down ballot, but did not vote for the current president. And so I tend to be hopeful about that. And in the midst of politics, some people say, we need an opportunity to totally sweep the House, sweep the Senate. I sometimes think that makes people lazy. I think that we ought to be forced to talk to one another and to hear each other, and then to come together to provide solutions for the common good.
I agree so much. I love the balance of power. I hope we can get it back somehow. Let me be a damper. How do you feel that 70 million people voted for no change? Hey, this is cool. Whatever this craziness is going on, I'll vote for that. I'm baffled. I'm totally baffled.
Well, I think that when we start sort of looking at what is it that people were actually looking for, and there's an interesting notion called the paradox of voting, where we tend to want to hold on to our really sort of important major issues, right? It's sort of like, what's important to me? What candidate perhaps represents that, in spite of the other stuff. And so, for instance, there's an interesting conversation about, I think Fareed Zakaria put a piece in the Washington Post about how the Democrats sort of missed it with regard to their sort of minority outreach, because the Democrats have a tendency to see minority groups monolithically. And so, for instance, in the case of our Latinx communities, it's sort of through this particular lens of sort of Mexico and immigrants, okay? And then also that for all those others who've come to the country, they still see it through this African-American lens. Well, remember, a large number of our immigrant population self-selected into the United States of America, all right? And they're not seeing it through the lens of African-Americans, all right? And the gross inequities that have been experienced for centuries, all right? And so when it starts talking about the economy, opportunity, so on and so forth, they're saying, well, you know what? This is working pretty well for me. But then here's the other piece, which I think is very, very interesting, especially in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space, that for some persons of color, they try to distance themselves from that particular, ethnic or cultural identity in order to assimilate. And so we begin to understand that. And so there are these conversations that people really can't have openly, which I wish we could really begin to talk openly about, back to, helping us sort of disaggregate some of the votes, right? And disaggregate our understanding of ethnic and cultural communities and say, why did you make this choice? And I think that's important. One simple piece was the lack of response from the Democrats with regard to that socialist narrative. So what happens when you have persons who came from socialist countries? Socialism, communism, it scares people to death. Here in the election, in the senatorial race between Reverend Raphael Warnock and Kelly Loeffler, people use the term radical. It's radical. Oh, it's radical. It's sort of like, okay, well, what's radical about it? And to really, really talk about that. I was hoping to grab the survey for you, but you can always Google it, about when Gallup looked at the attitudes of African Americans about defund the police, that the small number of African Americans who really want to defund the police, that some 60% say, no, we're about just right. But then there's another 20-something% that said, oh, we need more.
That was so amazing. I have seen that study, and
Yes.
it's like, or I've heard the trend, and it's like, what? But it's like, that's a great example of, let's ask the people we're trying to help what they want,
Yes.
instead of putting our values, because I didn't even think of I kept saying, what on earth is wrong with socialism? And you're right, so many people immigrated from socialistic countries, and it's like, wait a minute, you're changing the game here.
Yeah.
Yeah, so as coaches,
Mm-hmm.
our philosophy is change the world one person at a time. I know you're doing more than that. I know you're down there, and so what are you going to do after you find out about John Lewis's seat? What's next on your agenda?
Sure, sure. Well, back to the study that I did in terms of the nonprofit sector, sort of documenting the season, and once again, the term pandemics. And so, what is it that we see, or what did I find that was different? And so, the usual work in the nonprofit sector, people are cash strapped. How do they respond to that? But there's an upcoming, what we might call, sort of the eviction tsunami,
Oh,
that's coming. And so it's very, very important that our that our Congress acts, and they really should act swiftly. I'm just so disturbed at just the delay. It's like, friends, we're in trouble right now. Many of the assumptions that we might have used before, they no longer hold. And so let's go ahead and bring some relief to the American people. And so that was one. But then the other piece, I use the term equilibrium, that we are thrown off from a mental health perspective. And so one of the things as a coach that I hope to do is to engage in some work with leaders across sectors, really, to really talk about our mental muscle. We've heard the term before about grit, determination, resilience, adaptability, but how do we really do that? And so that is going to be my next foray across sectors, across conversations, because it seems that we need to have the ability to walk and chew gum at the same time.
well, what do you mean by thrown off mental ability? What's that mean?
Oh, certainly. The mental stress of the pandemics is really starting to take its toll, and the CDC has done some work really looking across, age, race, gender, what the isolation has done to us, the stresses about the economy. Our young people, ages 11 to 17, suicidal ideation is up among them. And so imagine, that what has happened for us now is, as say executives, we're now in our homes. We can no longer put on that facade of, I'm just the manager and this is just work, and so I will do this. No, you're looking into my room, and my child can't go to school, and so she or he is struggling, and all that going on. It is taking a mental toll, and I don't think that we're taking that as seriously as we need to. One success story is that one of the nonprofits that I researched actually made mental health counselors available to their staff.
Wow.
And so I thought that was just wonderful. But I want to go ahead and continue that, because that was for a larger nonprofit. Many of our smaller nonprofits, they don't have that type of resourcing. And so I think the ICF has been big on that. I don't know if you were aware that they actually increased that more pro bono hours can count towards certification now, so that we can be more of service. And so again, our mental health, we need to pay more attention to that, and to help people to not just survive, but to move to thrive as we move beyond this place.
That's interesting, because yeah, and as this insanity continues, or this change, I don't know what it is, chaos continues, more and more coaches are needed, and yet more and more people can't afford coaches now. So
Yes.
that's the dilemma, and I know you're working on that. I'm going to disclose that Nicholas also has this fantastic nonprofit program, and we're going to talk about that in February. But right now, we were thought, oh, let's get on this political bandwagon and see, you know, what do we do now that the votes have been tallied? Of course, I know not in Georgia. You still got some votes to count there. But what's a role? What do we do now?
Sure.
You have 3 minutes to tell us.
Okay, great.
That out for us,
Again, you know, just really great opportunities for coaches. You know, as you and I were together in the ICF Advance, and one of the things they talked about was the democratization of coaching. And so I think that there is there's place and space for us to be able to reach out, help, be of service. One of the things that I've done, so beginning in May, I did a 3-week webinar called Pastoring During a Pandemic, where I reached out to faith leaders from different faith communities. And so that was wonderful to really, because whatever faith community where one finds oneself, we're still taking care of people and they have those needs. And so that was awesome to be able to talk about pastoring during a pandemic. So looking to do a follow-up, which is still pastoring during a pandemic.
Part 2.
Right. And making sure that people are attending to themselves, you know, so the idea of care for the caregivers. So I'm not only asking questions of where do you go for strategic advice, but where do you go, you know, so that you're going to stop pouring out, you know, and not getting an infilling for yourself. And so I think coaches can really do that. They're just people that you just know that you're talking to. I enjoy, as I go through the store and I talk to my frontline workers, and I just stop and pause and say, how are you doing?
Ah, beautiful.
Anybody can do that and say, and I'm not just doing that to be polite, you know,
right?
Just to take a moment.
It's a real genuine.
Just to back it up and say for real, because when I spoke to my nonprofit leaders, many of them said that to me. They said, you know what, I appreciate the fact that you just, you know, the email that I sent out was reaching out, here to help.
Wow. Love it.
And we got on the Zoom conference, and before we sort of got into the questions about the challenges they're facing, you know, spoken, unspoken fears, you know, and the like, I said, how are you doing for real? Because I don't think there was a single person that I spoke to that was actually back in their office.
I'm going to leave that as a lesson and a message to us all. Let's all do that. That's wonderful. Nicholas, how can people get in touch with you?
Surely.
Find out what you're doing.
Surely. NicholasHarveyConsulting.com. And my email is very easy. It's nh@NicholasHarveyConsulting.com. And so I'm looking towards 2021, continuing this work, you know, across sectors. We're going to work on our mental fitness. You know, we're going to allow people to go ahead and show up fully as who they are and be a benefit for societal impact.
I am so thrilled that you agreed to come on the program, and I'm looking forward to our February show. Thank you, Nicholas Harvey, and be well until we talk again.
Thank you so much. My pleasure. Bye-bye.